What's up, guys? What's up, guys? Here we are, page 64, Antiquity, Unveiled, and we're going to do Potamon, the Greek Alexandrian Reformer. So here is his spirit testimony of Potamon, and that's Potamon. And it's, Sir, there has never been a religious idea promulgated on earth in later times that has not had its counterpart in the more ancient religious systems. The principal quarrels of the Christian Church have been over the doctrines of the Trinity, or the effort to make three out of one. This has been the occasion of a vast amount of bloodshed. This has been the occasion of a vast amount of bloodshed. In my day, I tried to reconcile these creedal ideas of all religious systems and to amalgamate them together. But the same difficulties met my efforts that meet yours today. Ecclesiastics have but one means to keep their hold upon the people, and that is the encouragement of ignorance and bigotry. Wrest these from them, and their power is gone. For trying to regenerate old ideas, for trying to make sure a better system or a more systematic religion, I was met by curses, and I ended my life in exile. I was banished because I tried to purify the then existing religious systems. But you have a far better day to work in, because you have the aid of the greatest art of modern times, namely the art of printing, and you can scatter truth all over the land. Keep on with your work, and although you may be persecuted, there is one thing they cannot do. They cannot banish you nor take your life at this day. All the good you moderns enjoy has been the work of men who are infidels to the prevailing creeds and beliefs of their time. And in conclusion, I want to say a few words on the absolute proofs of spirit existence. We dare not, as spirits, give the masses of the present day absolute proofs of the spirit life, for should we do so, they would not perform their mission here. Once in possession of the whole of the absolute proof of the afterlife, you would find this people becoming a nation of suicides. First, they must understand the true duties of mortal existence before they can safely receive the absolute proofs of spirit existence. I am Potamon. All right. On receiving the above communication, and having no knowledge ourselves of who Potamon was, we concluded to look the matter up. With the exception of a 4-line mention of him in the American Encyclopedia, we could find nothing concerning him in either of the English or the American encyclopedias or biographical dictionaries. After a protracted search, we found the following reference to this great religious reformer in the Nouvelle Biographie Générale, published in Paris in 1862, of which we give our translation. Potamon, a Greek philosopher of the Alexandrian School, was born at Alexandria and lived in the 3rd century of the Christian era. It is true that according to Suidas, Suidas, who speaks of Ares and Potamon, the philosopher should have been contemporaneous with the emperor Octavius Augustus, but Porphyry, Porphry, in his life of Plotinus, about 9, said positively that Potamon, according to his understanding, treated of a new philosophy of which he laid the foundation. New Plotinus was born about A.D. 250 and died at the age of 65 and evidently lived in the 3rd century of our era. The same ought to have been the case with Potamon. Now, what was this new philosophy of which Porphyry speaks, and of which he represents Potamon as the founder? According to those descriptions of Plotinus, it is found contained in two works, one of which was a contemporary commentary on the Timaeus of Plato, and the other a treatise on the first principles. Of these treatises, there remains absolutely nothing. But we know something of the second from a passage of Diogenes Laertius, and that's Diogenes in the introduction of his book on the lives and doctrines of the illustrious philosophers. But in a short time, said this biographer, since an eclectic school was instituted by Potamon of Alexandria, which selected from the doctrines of all the different sects, two things, Potamon explained, are necessary to discern truth. On one part, the principle that judges, that is to say, reason. On the other, the exact representation of the objects of our judgment. As to the principles of things he recognized, for matter, quality, action, and place, in other words, of what and by whom a thing is made, how it is made, and where it is made, he established as the aim to which all ought to tend, a perfectly virtuous life, without excluding at all times the needs of the body nor those external to it. The results of this passage from Diogenes Laertius, combined with the testimony of Porphyry, are, first, that Potamon was the founder of the Eclectic School, and that, probably, this school owes its name to him. Second, that he adopted to the purifytic doctrine relative to the principles of things. And third, in ethics, he attempted a kind of conciliation between Stoicism and Epicureanism, Epicureanism, and that's by C. Mallet, Mallet. In the light of the foregoing spirit communication, it would seem that Suetus was right as to the time in which Potamon lived and taught the eclecticism, and that Porphyry and M. Mallet, the French author, were wrong. Potamon undoubtedly lived and taught under the Roman Emperor Octavius Augustus at Alexandria, and not in the 3rd century, as erroneously claimed by M. Mallet. On the authority of Porphyry, it would seem also to settle the question as to the disputed age in which Diogenes Laertius lived and wrote. Speaking of the latter, M. Audube says, "We know absolutely nothing of the life of Diogenes Laertius. It can hardly be affirmed that he was born at Laertia, Laertia, a city of Sicilia. It was in what year is unknown. We are reduced to the conjectures as to the epoch in which he lived, and on this point the critics have widely differed. Some, by an evident confusion, make him live under the reign of Augustus, others in the time of Constantine. Now, as Diogenes Laertius said, in the writing of Potamon, that the latter had a short time before established a new school of philosophy, it becomes almost certain that Diogenes was contemporaneous with Potamon, and that they both lived and wrote under the reign of the Roman Emperor Augustus, at or about the time when it is said that Jesus Christ lived and taught on earth. Is it not a most significant fact that so little is known of those two great eclectic authors, while their teachings and writings have been surreptitiously appropriated by the Christian priesthood and attributed to the fictitious man God, Jesus? In view of the importance that we attach to the spirit return of Potamon, we can refrain from laying before our readers the following translation of a passage from M. Aub's sketch of the life of this great author. That is, the work of Diogenes Laertius. Diogenes Laertius has for its title Lives and Opinions of the Most Illustrious Philosophers. It comprises 10 books with a preface, which contains some general considerations on the origin of philosophy, the division of the schools, and the different parties among philosophers. Diogenes commences by opposing the opinion of those who placed the cradle of philosophy in the East. Grecian philosophy, according to him, was autochthonous, autochthonous, parentheses, native to Greece. The first period comprises the 7 sages. The second, which is the age of development and maturity, commenced with Anaximander and Pythagoras, and ended with Chrysippus and Epicurus. It is embraced entirely in 2 schools: the Ionian school, of which Anaximander, the disciples of Thales, is the chief, and Chrysippus was the last representative, and the Italian school, of which Pythagoras is the father, and which became extinct with Epicurus. Such was the plan of Diogenes as set forth in the preface to his work. It cannot be denied that this plan was extremely simple, but at the same time, we cannot but be astonished that this historian made so readily an abstract of the most perceptible differences which distinguished the various philosophical doctrines, and that he mingled this arbitrarily the most opposite schools of philosophy. It will be seen from that extract from Diogenes' writing that as a historian he was governed by the eclectic philosophy and sought to cooperate with his contemporary Potamon in promoting harmony among the rival religious partisans of their epoch. It is a sad outcome of their benevolent efforts that the Christian priesthood, who sought to turn their beneficent labors to their personal advantage, should have succeeded in concealing from their fellow men the true source of their stolen and corrupted eclectic treatises. The reason why Diogenes Laertius had so little to say about his contemporary, the greatest of all reformers, Potamon, is rendered very evident from the statement made in his communication, or the communication concerning him, that he was banished for his efforts to bring a religion of peace to his fellow men. We would have the reader to remark, especially, that the communicating spirit has nothing to say about Potamon as the founder of a school of philosophy, but expressly claims that he sought to reconcile the varying creedal ideas of all religions. For this humane and benevolent effort he incurred the united animosity of the prevailing religious sects of his country, for which he was banished and died in exile. The parallel which, as a spirit, he draws between his own experience and that which he reminds us we are passing through is not the least significant feature of that communication. Time and space will not now admit of a more extended presentation of the incidents connected with the receipt of that communication. We will, therefore, point out a few things in connection with it that seem to us of pregnant importance. There can be little, if any, reasonable doubt that Potamon lived at the very time when it is said that Jesus lived, that he sought to institute, as the communication says, a better system or a more systematic religion, that although the writings of all the other founders of religious systems in Greece and at Alexandria have been preserved and brought down to our time, with the exception of the brief reference to him and his writings, by his contemporary Diogenes Laertius, there is not an authentic trace of his writings preserved. That he was an illustrious philosopher and worthy to rank with the founders of the other great Grecian schools. In the estimation of the eclectic biographer Diogenes, the latter should have ventured to say so little concerning Potamon and his writings, or if he said more than has come down to us, that what he did say we suppressed by those who sought to rob this great religious reformer of the credit of his beneficent labors, that his teachings were condemned by the more powerful of the great rival religious sects, or schools of philosophy as they were called, that then prevailed, that, as the communication says, he was banished from his attempt to reconcile the contradictory creeds and dogma of various religious systems of his day and died in exile, that the original writings from which those of the present New Testament, as it is called, were derived, were in the Greek language, that they are conceded to have been obtained from Alexandria, the native city of Potamon, and the scene of his great attempt to reform the prevailing religious systems of his time, that the Christian fathers, so called, should have utterly ignored Potamon, the great founder of the religious system that they appropriated and attributed falsely to God, in order that they might the more readily and thoroughly rule over their ignorant and too confiding fellow beings. All these and many other facts point most strongly, if not positively, to the conclusion that Potamon, a great-souled, learned, and benevolent Greek, was the true author of the religious system which, no doubt greatly modified and altered to suit the interests of the ambitious and tyrannical priests, has come down to us as the work of Jesus Christ. But by far the most significant fact of all is that the labored efforts of modern Christian sectaries and writers to show that Potamon did not found his eclectic system of religion until the 3rd century, and not at the very epoch at which it was said Jesus Christ lived and taught, as Suidas stated when he said, Potamon should have been contemporaneous with the Emperor Octavius Augustus. It is equally significant that the same efforts have been put forth to make it appear that Diogenes Laertius did not live and write his biographical work on the lives and doctrines of illustrious philosophers until the 3rd century or later. The latter having, as before mentioned, said in speaking of Potamon, it is but a short time since an eclectic school was instituted by Potamon of Alexandria, which chose from the doctrines among the different sects. The Christian plagiarists could not afford to have it known that the author whose writings they were stealing lived at the very time when they pretended that their fictitious man-god lived. It is amazing that so monstrous and manifest a priestly fraud as is the pretense that Jesus Christ was the author of the contents of the New Testament, should have remained so long concealed. But for the fact that Potamon, The Grecian sage and reformer at last found the means, through a poor, persecuted, and uneducated medium, to return after nearly 1900 years and assert his place in history of literature and learning. The great mysterious secret of the real origin of the Christian religion would have remained with the Catholic priesthood, the only Christian priesthood in existence. The Protestant clergy of the various dissenting sects know nothing whatever of the religious system about which they claim to know so much, and at the same time confess they know so little. Question them about what they preach for positive truth, and they will tell you that it is all a mystery, mystery, mystery. How far the religious doctrines and practices selected by Potamon from all the prevailing religions of his day have been retained by his Christian plagiarists may never be fully known, but that the latter have copied them largely seems very obvious. It is a conceded fact that the Gospels according to St. Matthew, St. Mark, St. Luke, and St. John, as well as the Acts of the Apostles, are but modified versions of some older writing or writings, the author or authors of which had been mostly unaccountably concealed. It has not been pretended that Jesus Christ ever wrote a line of the contents of the New Testament, nor can it be seriously pretended that such a founder of a new religion lived at the time of the Christian writers assign as the epoch of his earthly career. If it be once established that Diogenes Laertius lived and wrote during the reign of the Emperor Augustus, as we are already to show was the fact against the world. Mr. Aube, A-U-B-E, has fully testified to the unprejudiced manner in which Diogenes has presented the doctrinal tenets and creeds of the prevailing religious sects of that early age. And there cannot be a doubt that any such founder of a religion such as Jesus is represented to have been, lived, and taught the doctrines attributed to him. Diogenes Laertius would have included him in his biographical list of illustrious philosophers. Even Suidas, S-U-I-D-A-S, the Greek lexicographer, who stated that Diogenes Laertius should have been contemporaneous with the Emperor Octavius Augustus, has shared the same fate as befell Potamon and Diogenes at the hands of the Christian priesthood, who, prior to the discovery of the art of printing, for 1400 years monopolized the learning of the world. Some Christian authors have sought to make it appear that there was no such person as Suidas lived, and that the name was assumed by authors of the writings bearing his name. Others have sought to show that he lived and wrote as late as the 4th century, in order to remove him as far as possible from the time in which he actually wrote. But there can be little doubt that Suidas lived and wrote in or near the region of Augustus, but where he lived seems not to be known. Giraldi, 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 the Italian poet and archaeologist, writing of Suidas in the 16th century, says it was under the reign of Augustus that he lived. Judging from the obscurity thrown over his history by the Christian writers generally, we conclude that Giraldi was correct, he deriving his knowledge upon the subject from sufficient data in the Vatican at Rome, where Leo X allowed him to reside while visiting Rome with his pupil, Hercules, son of Count Rangon, afterwards known as Cardinal of Rangon, for some reason sufficient to his papal masters Adrian VI and Clement VII, he never acquired a higher position than apostolic prothary, Prothonotary. We infer that Giraldi, in his archaeological researches, had learned too much concerning the true origin of the Christian religion, and hence he was neglected and persecuted. The simple fact that he had discovered that Potamon, Diogenes Laertius, and Suidas were contemporaneous authors under the reign of Augustus at the time of Jesus Christ, was falsely alleged to have lived, was enough to have cost him his life, and no doubt it would have done so only for his influence with the people in the priest-ridden age and country. In view, therefore, of the circumstances that we have hurriedly thrown together in the great pressure of our general editorial labors, all tending so strongly to corroborate that the statements of the foregoing spirit communication, we conclude that the communication is authentically from the spirit of the founder of the Eclectic School of Alexandria, that he lived at the precise time when Jesus Christ is said to have lived, and that he attempted the greatest and noblest religious reformation that is known in the past history of the world, that Diogenes Laertius and Suidas, contemporaneous writers of the day, should have noticed that Potamon, as a founder of a grandly beneficent school of religious reformers, and that they should have made no mention of Jesus Christ as engaged in such a work, at the only period when it is pretended he was so engaged, puts an end forever to the misrepresentation that the teachings and the inculcations of the New Testament were the work of any such man or divine being as Jesus. Every rational person might have to know that the writings of the New Testament were the work of a man or a school of men who sought to blend such portions of the preceding creeds, doctrines, ceremonies, practices, and religious formulas into a single religion that would serve to harmonize and unite mankind in one common effort to advance the welfare of all. No person can attentively read the New Testament writings and not perceive the fact that there is hardly a paragraph of them which does not contain very clear evidence that it is but a slightly modified reproduction of some tenet or doctrine of some one or more of the various religious systems prevailing at the time of their production, or that prevailed in the reign of Augustus, when Potamon lived and founded the Eclectic School of religious instruction. The religious systems of China, India, Persia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, Palestine, and even the Druidical system of the northern and western Europe were largely drawn from to make up the eclectic system of religion founded by Potamon, a religion for a period of more than 100 years after he died in exile, was suppressed and then revived as being of divine origin and attributed to Ies, the Phoenician name of the god Bacchus, or the sun personified. The etymological, etymological, meaning of that title being I, the one, and S, the fire or light, or taken as one word, Ies, the one light. This is none other than the light of St. John's Gospel, and this name is to be found everywhere on the Christian altars, both Protestant and Catholic, thus clearly showing that the Christian religion is but a modification of Oriental sun worship attributed to Zoroaster, Zoroaster, the same letters IHS, which are in the Greek text, are read by Christians JES, and the Roman Christian priesthood added the terminus US, making the name of the Fitius author of the eclectic system Potamon, Jesus, Jesus. This was a tub thrown to the Pharisee whale by the successors of Potamon. To that, the name of the latter added the name of the Hindu deity Krishtu, thus as the representative of the new system, making not Potamon its founder, but Jesus Christ, the compound deified myth of the Orientals and Hindus, the nominal head of the church. In view of what we have here submitted for the unprejudiced consideration of our readers on a topic of transcendent importance, if truth is ever to attain its proper place in the estimation of mankind, we claim to have taken a position in relation to the true origin and nature of the so-called Christian system of religion that cannot be shaken, and in order to test its value, we challenge the Christian world to show that we are in error in our claims that Potamon and his followers were the founders of the so-called Christian religion and not Jesus Christ, as they claim. We ask our readers to invite the attention of the Christian ministry everywhere to this fact and require them in the cause of truth to explain, or like men, acknowledge that the religion they are teaching is false. That's important. We will add in connection with what we have previously offered, bearing upon the history of the great religious reformer Potamon, and we have given such references to him as have come down to us, or rather such references to him as the Roman Catholic priesthood have permitted to reach the public, whether there is not in the Vatican Library at Rome, among the other secret archives of the Pontifical Church, much fuller information in relation to this remarkable man, we may never know. Enough, however, has been disclosed to show that the Potamon attempted to formulate a religious system by taking the best portions of the various religious systems of his time and blending them so as to make a system that would be adapted to take the place of all other religious systems. Diogenes Laertius, in the introduction to his inestimable work, The Lives and Opinions of Illustrious Philosophers, mentions Potamon and makes a general statement of his views and teachings in the introduction to his work, yet he does not pretend to notice him in the body of his work. We inferred that Diogenes had said so little concerning the teachings of Potamon as is perceived, from fear of consequences personal to himself. Potamon, having, as he says in his communication, been banished on account of his attempt to found a new and more perfect system of religion. On further investigation, we conclude that Diogenes Laertius did set forth the personal history and opinions of Potamon, as he did the personal history and opinions of all the other celebrated philosophers of his time. In his work, over 80 illustrious philosophers are treated of by Diogenes Laertius, all of them anterior to Potamon, and yet not one word in the body of the work in relation to this, the greatest and most modern of them all. The fact that Diogenes makes especial mention of him in that introduction to his work, as the founder of the new sect that selected his doctrines from all the other sects, and the great end of which was to develop a perfect and pure life, shows how far Potamon was before all the other philosophers of Greece. His school was established at Alexandria only a short time before Diogenes wrote, and yet Potamon is not so much as mentioned in the list of philosophers whose teachings he sought to embody in his work. It will not do to say that Diogenes either intentionally or inadvertently admitted to give the life and opinions of Potamon. The probabilities are so strong as almost to amount to a certainty that Diogenes did give a history more or less in detail of Potamon in his teachings. That this history of Potamon is not in the biographical work of Diogenes as it has come down to us, renders it most certain that it had been suppressed by those into whose hands that work afterwards fell. Who were the persons into whose hands the work of Diogenes fell? Most certainly they were the Christian priesthood, into whose hands the whole literary treasures of ancient times fell after the banishment and condemnation of Potamon. Then it was the Christian priesthood who, for some purpose, suppressed that portion of the writings of Diogenes Laertius relating to Potamon. As in the order of arrangement adopted by Diogenes in the preface to his work, he would have sketched the history of Potamon and his opinions last. It was an easy thing to eliminate that portion without in any way interfering with the biographies that preceded the biography of Potamon. Not so with the brief allusion in the preface to Potamon and his teachings. It would be impossible to erase or remove it without showing that for some reason a part of the preface had been destroyed, and hence that precious remnant of the teachings of Potamon has been allowed to come down to us. These priestly foes to truth naturally thought that in those few lines of that preface no one would ever perceive the relation to the origin of the Christian religion, and hence it did not share the fate of the biography itself. But for the return of the spirit of Potamon, his declaring what he attempted to do, and his ostracism and banishment, therefore, through the influence of the rival religious sects, the wonderful significance of that reference by Diogenes to Potamon would have continued to escape public observation. In the light of his spirit communication, its true significance is rendered plain. What was there in the writings of Potamon that was so obnoxious to his religious and philosophical contemporaries, and to those who have since sought to destroy every vestige of the religious system he founded in Alexandria in the reign of Augustus? Can there be a doubt but that he sought to blend with the metaphysical theories of Greece and Rome the ethical and theological systems of the other peoples of his age, and thus establish a new system that should contain and effect all of good that could be derived from each and all of them? This was the part of true wisdom, and shows that Potamon was as far before the philosophers and priests of his time as he was before the Christian plagiarists who appropriated his labors uncredited in all that can give luster to human life. As before said, we may never know exactly what Potamon taught, but when we consider the care with which the Christian priesthood have sought to conceal the fact that Potamon lived and taught at the very time when it is said the man God Jesus lived and taught, we may naturally infer that the teachings and doctrines of Potamon were the same, or nearly the same, as those which they have attributed falsely to Jesus. To give the weight of divine authority to these doctrines, it was indispensable to destroy, as far as possible, all trace of their human origin, and hence so little has come down to us in the name of the true author of these doctrines, the founder of the eclectic system of religion. It has been the boast of Christian writers that there never was so perfect a religious system established upon the earth as the Christian religion, and yet there is not a tenet, dogma, doctrine, ceremony, form, or prayer, fast or feast, title or deity, form of church government, official rank, or religious observance of any kind that is not identical with some prototype to be found in one or more of the more ancient religious systems. That being so, the originator of that religion was an eclectic, whether Potamon or Jesus, and as both must have lived at or about the same time, if the latter lived at all, and as Potamon is by all authorities conceded to be the founder of eclecticism in religion, and as Jesus is not so much as mentioned by anyone as having been a teacher of eclecticism, it becomes more than a reasonable certainty that Potamon, and not Jesus, was the founder of what has been called or miscalled Christianity. We have found access to information that we feel confident will show beyond all question that no such person, man, or God as Jesus Christ had anything to do with establishing the religion that has been taught in that name. We have at our command many incidental facts, all tending to show that the Christian religion is solely of human origin, and nothing especially divine connected with it. For more than 100 years, there is little or no trace left of those teachings of Potamon, or of the eclectic system of religion which he founded. About that time, the books comprised in the New Testament, so-called, were brought to light and were entitled the Gospels, according to St. Matthew, St. Mark, St. Luke, St. John, and the Acts of the Apostles, etc. Why they were so designated, and by whom they were so designated, no one knows, or if they did know, none have told us. Those titles show very plainly that they are not the gospel, or God spell, according to Jesus Christ. If they have been the latter, the Christian priesthood would not have hesitated to say so. We have just as much right to infer that those writings were different versions of the teachings of Jesus, and we have vastly more reasons to think so, in view of the facts we have stated than those which we intend to adduce in detail in the course of this investigation. The first follower of the teachings of Potamon, who avowed his conversion to the eclectic religion, was Ammonius Saccas, of whom too little was known, or at least too little of whose teachings have been permitted to come down to us. Of this great teacher, the Biographie Universelle says, Ammonius Saccas, thus called because it is said he was a sack or bag bearer in his youth. He was a native of Alexandria and lived towards the end of the 2nd century. His parents were poor and Christians. They raised him in their religion. Disgusted with his wearing calling, he left it to give himself up to the study of philosophy, in which it is believed he had Pantanaeus as his master. After some years he opened a school and drew around him a great number of disciples, of whom the most celebrated were Herennius, Origen, Origen, and Plotinus. This this school is ordinarily regarded as the first of the eclectic philosophy. This opinion, nevertheless, needs rectification. Eclecticism is the doctrine of those who, without embracing any particular system, take from each system that which is most conformable to the truth, and of these various selections arranging a whole new system as a whole. It was in this manner that Potamon proceeded, but it is impossible to give the name of eclecticism to the philosophy (why not religion) of Ammonius, a monstrous and singular collection of the most contradictory opinions. Indeed, not content with having amalgamated without the arrangement the fundamental systems of the different Greek sects, Epicureanism accepted, that's Epicureanism accepted, he fell into the same confusion relative to religious principles, so that the chaos of his doctrines embraced alike philosophic opinions and sacred dogmas. He ought then to be regarded rather as the founder of Theosophy or the illuminated. Ammonius never wrote anything. He confided his principles only to a small number of disciples and under the veil of mystery. Meantime, some historians make him the author of an evangelical concordance, which is found in the 7th volume of the Bibliothèque de Paris, and that others attributed with the better reason to a bishop Ammonius. The Encyclopedia Britannica has mention of him here. Just tells a little bit about his history. Check that out. That's on page 76 and 77. Then we get over to here, the final comments on him. Looks like right here. So we here see another attempt on the part of a Christian writer to get rid of all trace of the teachings of Potamon and to prevent the discovery of the great secret of the Roman Catholic priesthood, that Potamon and not Jesus was the founder of the Christian religion. Both of the writers cited concede that Ammonius Saccas was reared a Christian by his parents. The English writer quotes Porphyry to show that Ammonius apostatized, but admits that Eusebius, in his church history, denied this apostasy and affirms that Ammonius continued to live a Christian to the end of his life. It is true he attempts to get rid of that testimony of the most erudite and thoroughly informed Christian father by saying, "It is clear, however, that Eusebius is referring to another Ammonius, a Christian, who lived in Alexandria during the 3rd century." We are not, however, told by this very astute writer that there was any reason to believe that Ammonius, whom Porphyry alleged apostatized from the Christian faith, was the Christian Ammonius of the 3rd century. Nor has he pretended that the latter Ammonius was ever charged by Porphyry with having apostatized from the Christian faith. There can, therefore, be little or no doubt that Eusebius referred to Ammonius Saccas when he claimed that he continued a Christian to the end of his life. Now, it being a fact, according to Eusebius, that Ammonius Saccas was a Christian, and that the Christian doctrines which he taught were kept secret while he lived, it became a matter of the deepest interest to know what those Christian teachings were which Ammonius kept secret. The English writer does not pretend that those secret Christian teachings were what afterwards became known as the doctrines of the Neoplatonists. It is true that the French writer above quoted says that the secret doctrines of the Eclectic School of the Religionists, founded by Potamon, as the inception of what afterwards became Christianity, were not the doctrines of the eclecticism, but we will show, before we close this treaty, that Ammonius Saccas was a follower of the eclectic system of religion founded by Potamon at the very period when the Christian religion is universally admitted to have originated. We have again, in the case of Ammonius Saccas, the evidence that his contemporaries sought to before his history and teachings. Thanks to his followers, Herennius, Origen, Plotinus, this attempt at Christian concealment was less successful than in the case with Potamon. There can be but little room for question, in view of all the facts which have been and which will yet be adduced, that the teachings of Ammonius were only kept secret because of the certain destruction that would have awaited him had he publicly disclosed the fact that Christianity was not of divine origin, and that human spirits held direct communion with mortals. Those secrets are as carefully guarded today by the Christian priesthood as they were by Ammonius Saccas in the 3rd century. Finding that they can no longer resist the light which modern spiritualism is throwing into the dark chambers of the mystery in which God's living truths have been buried by the impious priestly craft, these sanctimonious swindlers cry out, "It is the devil. It is the devil's work. Have nothing to do with it." We answer them and say, it has been the devil's work that these most important truths have been so long concealed. It will yet prove that the proscribed Potamon and his followers have been the saviors of their fellow men, and not the cowled deceivers of their race, who have stolen the garments of sanctity the more effectually to accomplish the enslavement of the people. All right, and that was Potamon from Antiquity Unveiled.